Oh, you should never, never doubt what nobody is sure about.
Candy is dandy, but liquor is quicker.
We are the music makers, and we are the dreamers of dreams.
The first movie I can remember seeing in the theater was Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. We'll miss you, Gene.
You don't have to be poor anymore. Jesus is here.
The loudspeaker spoke up and said, Christianity is stupid.
Greetings, fellow worker slaves, podcasting at 128 kilobits from the Fortress of Squalitude, not far from the Redneck Mecca. This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park Podcast. I'm your host, Tucker. Professor Fuzznuts is making his way over here and sticking himself into my face because that's the way he is. Yes, it's a podcast hosted by a guy and his cat. Get over it. This episode, I'm joined by the lovely America Darling Curl, who will be showing up in just a few minutes. I haven't yet figured out how to rig things so that my guests can hear audio files as I play them, so I recorded the intro bit separately since there's no point in having America listen to silence while the clip plays. This episode's a bit longer than usual, which I know can be annoying, but I urge you to stick around until the end because America goes on a pretty epic rant at the end. No real news for me to report about my job, save I have managed to find a regular ride to and from work now. One of the folks I work with lives a block over from where I do, and she has been gracious enough to give me a ride. I am presently taking advantage of having a lot of extra time by slowly working to get the house back into something resembling order. I should have this accomplished about the time the 2020 election rolls around. And for those of you wondering why I sound different this week, I loaned my mic to Chris from the Podunk Polymath podcast as he was going to an atheist conference and needed it to do some interviews. He offered to take me along, but I opted not to go because I've got so much to do around the house. I should be back to sounding only slightly horrific next week. And if all goes as planned, Andy Cowan from the Or Really Radio podcast will be my guest. Now, let's join America and the news. And joining me this week is the lovely and talented America Darling Curl.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. And since we didn't get to have you on because you had computer problems, before we get to the news, let's talk about that outreach thing that you went to at the church near you.
Sure, yeah. So the local president of American Atheists in my organization was contacted by a very, how did I describe it? A very liberal hippie granola church. And they had a talk series. So the talk series featured, the first week was atheists, the second week was a Buddhist monk, then they were doing someone who was political and not necessarily of their same political feelings. Again, this seemed to be a very liberal, lefty, hippie kind of church. And then the last week was a friend of the church, maybe not necessarily a churchgoer, but a gay man. So he was there to talk about LGBTQ feelings. And I went a week early, accidentally, because I'd had a party the night before, and it was absolutely crazy. We were up for 12 hours. And I am notorious for being late to literally everything. So I'd set my alarm, and I'm rushing out of the house, and I go to this thing and discover that I'm a week early. And I ended up going to church accidentally. And it turned out to be a really good experience. They were incredibly nice, and when the pastor talked about this discussion series, he was very thoughtful and very respectful and very encouraging to, it was almost as if he knew I was there, knew I was representing the community, and sort of wanted to let the atheist guests that would be there next week know that this was not going to be some place where they were going to be harassed and harangued and just abused. And so I really appreciated that. And I did let one member of the church know that I was for the next week's discussion, and she was very nice about it. I think they mentioned God 5 or 6 times by name. You kind of got what they were talking about, but mostly it was like peace and love and be good to each other. And I remember the same woman coming up to me after the service and saying, I'm so sorry, that service actually had more God in it than they normally do. And I was kind of blown away because it's a church on a Sunday. That's what you would sort of expect to happen.
Yeah.
So the next week we went, and there were 5 of us. There was the president of the organization and then 4 members. One of the members in my local community, we function mostly through like Meetup and Facebook. And so one of the members who does the grief support group was there. We have the person who does one of our Thursday night meetings, which is sort of like we're at a bar and we're shooting the shit. And he's also in a hiking group, and he's really into science and bugs, and he's an engineer and does all these amazing things. So he was there. We had another friend of mine who is very Southern, very sweet guy. He's from Alabama. Love him to bits and pieces. Trying to get him to marry me, and he won't do it, so I'm devastated. Something about the age difference, or he doesn't like his ex-wife and doesn't want to get married again. It's all right. We'll talk about that later. So, and then there's a friend of mine who I discovered through this is an anti-theist, and I have met a couple of those, but I didn't realize that I actually had a friend who was anti-theist. And then there was little old me. And they just asked us a couple questions, and we answered very honestly. We talked about how we came to atheism. We were asked to give a challenge to this community. And the challenge that I remember the most was a friend who does the grief support group, who said, you know, when you are helping someone who is in a grieving process, or you're just meeting someone and you discover they are in a grieving process, perhaps try to be as neutral and secular as possible, because while you may feel like he or she is in a better place, it was God's plan, or whatever other thing you're going to say is really helpful, for a lot of other people, it completely takes them out of their grief and forces them to deal with this other thing that perhaps they don't believe. And that was apparently really incredible for a woman, because her toddler is unfortunately dying of cancer. And she said it is very hard for her, who is this liberal Christian, to constantly hear it's God's plan. Well, she doesn't want to fucking hear that. Her baby is dying. So that was really wonderful, and I liked that. And they're really, really nice people. I set up a lunch date with a group afterwards, and I like them. And if I still would have been a believer, this would have been the church that I would have gone to. Because one of the things that pushed me out of my religion was that I'm way too sex positive. I am way too much of a feminist. I am also queer and black, and I need a church that fit my liberal feelings, and way too many churches didn't. So I like them, and I will probably go back for another Sunday just because I thought they were kind of cool. And it's at 10 o'clock in the morning, so who isn't awake by 10 o'clock in the morning?
Me, if I've had a good night.
True. Good point. So yeah, they were really, really amazing, and I enjoyed the discussion, and I really enjoyed being there. So Yeah.
Have you ever heard interviews with Ryan Bell?
No.
Do you know who he is?
I don't.
Okay, he's the guy who, not that I'm an expert on, leaders in the atheist movement, but he's the guy who did the A Year of Living as an Atheist.
Oh, okay.
He was if I'm not mistaken, he was Seventh-day Adventist, and I heard an interview with him right when he announced that he was going to spend the year living as an atheist, and he was a pastor at, I don't know if, like I said, I can't remember if he was a Seventh-day Adventist or not, but we'll say he was. He was a pastor at one of their churches, several of their churches over the years, and he was describing all the things that he did, and it was obvious that he was the churches he preached at were liberal. I mean, because he had this huge outreach program to people with AIDS, to the homeless, to all this stuff. And I'm hearing the interview, and I'm like, dude, you're not a Christian. You're too good to be a Christian. Because you're doing all the things that they say they do, but they don't actually do very often. And so, you describing the church sounds sort of like that's the kind of place that he would have been running before he, gave up on religion and came out as an atheist.
I feel like there are maybe 2 or 3 pastors. There's a person that sort of does the beginning and the introduction and the closing, and then there was a man who sort of did the sermon in the middle. I don't even want to call it a sermon because it was more like motivational speaking. So the man who did the opening and closing was honest, and while we were talking, he said, I've told my congregation that not only is my son an atheist, but I am very much an agnostic, and I'm holding on by the barest thread. And so I felt like that was kind of a brave thing to say, and then it also made sense as I'm in this room that's more like, I don't know how to explain it. So I'm from Salt Lake City, and there's a lot of like hippy-dippy culture added with Native Americans. And I remember meditation circles in these rooms that had no windows, but very warm paint and very like low intimate lighting and some candles. And then a random like bluegrass band or folky kind of band. That's what this place was like. And it was the weirdest. It was like going to a folk concert and motivational speech more than going to a church. And actually, I feel like that's an incredibly good way to describe it. So I'm going to start doing it like that, because it was just this great, warm, lovey-dovey Sunday. So I like them, and this man was really nice. And we left there feeling great. In fact, actually, the person who runs the hiking group on one of the Thursdays talked about him dating a Christian, and he said he wished more Christians were like this church, and asked them to proselytize to get more Christians to be like them. And I would be much happier if more Christians were like this church.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the problem with any religion is the fundamentalists more than it is the casual believer.
Yeah, it's always the fundamentalists that screw everything up.
Okay, well, let's start reading the news here.
This is a fantasy business, Reverend. You can have any truth you want.
And so can you. Isn't that why you're here?
Isn't that why you are?
From religionnews.com, Bishop in scandal-ridden Italian diocese resigns. An Italian bishop who was a hero to traditional Catholics has resigned following a Vatican investigation into priests and seminarians accused of various scandals, including posting naked photos on gay websites and sexually harassing parishioners. And apparently Grindr has become a real boon for the Catholic priests because there's all these scandals starting to crop up now where people are finding photos of their Catholic priests. There's somewhere in Ireland there is a seminary that the Catholic Church is basically going to have to shut down because, like, everybody who goes there is on Grindr.
Oh no! You would think that people would understand in this day and age. You can't do both, and you would just think that other people would get. In this day and age, almost nothing is secret anymore.
Yeah, it's one of those things. If you have a small internet presence, when somebody Googles you, that whatever's there is going to show up. If you've got a large internet presence, then it's kind of a crapshoot as to what shows up.
Right.
So I don't really worry if somebody Googles me, them finding out a lot of stuff about me, because there's just so much stuff out there, and my name isn't terribly uncommon.
Right.
So, other stuff will get kicked. But, I mean, you've got a fairly rare name.
Yeah.
Even leaving out your middle name, well, I've never. You're the only person I've ever met who's had the last name of Curl.
It was my grandmother used to describe herself back when phone books were a really big thing. She would say, "I'm the second Curl in the phone book," and there were about 15 or 20 in the city that we lived in, and now everybody's online. So. There are a couple of us that I've met, and everyone asks me if I'm related to some basketball player, but no.
Well, I have a friend who his last name is, there's like 3 people in the U.S. that he's not related to that have that last name.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really rare and unique, so whenever somebody types in his name, his last name, he pops up. He's guaranteed to pop up. So, but the thing about this priest this bishop that I have to wonder about is he's got the same name as same last name as the librarian of my elementary school, and I have to wonder if they were somehow related. She was a pretty dour old woman, and he'd be old enough to be her son because she was ancient when I was in elementary school, and that was in the Dark Ages. So, we still had scribes making books. Gutenberg hadn't invented the printing press then. But
Tucker, I love you so much.
But this guy is a hardcore, extreme Catholic, and yet he was covering up for Kitty. Let's see, where is it?
They were.
He apparently had connections to guys who were running an underage prostitution ring. So this is one of those cases. It's like the mafia. If you're in the family, you can do pretty much whatever you want as long as you don't harm somebody in the family.
Right, and you don't want to bring too much embarrassment to the family. You don't want to bring too much attention.
Right.
I'm just amazed that underage prostitution ring and other people are posting nude photos on Facebook, which isn't even allowed. Who does that? And to Grindr and things like that, where I have been in restaurants with a friend of mine who uses Grindr all the time as sort of like a location beacon, just kind of for fun. And so sometimes we'll sit in restaurants and his Grindr will show that like 6 of the 10 guys around us are all on Grindr right at the same time. And some of them are with their wives. So it's always really interesting to think that, sir, I can match up your face with this nude photo of you and your butthole in a mirror to the face that I am looking at in Chuck E. Cheese. Perhaps let's be a little more discreet about these things.
Well, and I can understand and say Italy, but in the States, in most places, well, outside of the Deep South, being gay is not that big of a deal. So,
right.
But it's insane. But I mean, at least granted, Francis allowed this guy to resign, so the guy will get to keep all of his benefits and everything else from the church, rather than if he was fired and excommunicated. But at least Francis did apparently put pressure on this guy to get him out of there. So,
well, that's good.
That's that's progress. That's going from slavery to Jim Crow.
Right.
It's still terrible, but it's better. It's slightly better than what it was. So
yeah. So on that vein, since we were talking about Catholic priests, the next article is, what is the Vatican hiding? So 14 years ago, the U.S. government declassified a now pretty famous report called the La Vista Report on May 15, 1947. And this was a top secret U.S. Army intelligence report saying that the Vatican's role, or documenting the Vatican's role in aiding the escape of numerous high-ranking Nazi war criminals, including a bunch of men whose names I'm going to feel bad for not being able to pronounce. Although one of which was USS General Walter Roth, inventor of the mobile gas truck.
And that's when they say mobile gas truck, they don't mean a tanker truck. They mean a truck that they would drive it to a location, load people in the back, and they would be hit with poison gas.
Oh, I thought we were talking more. Okay, that makes a lot more sense, because when I thought of it, I thought of like running down the road in the way that they did like with the Zika mosquitoes, where they drove down the road and gassed people. But that makes more sense.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the movie called Conspiracy?
Yes.
With the, what's his name? He did all the Shakespearean movies.
I don't know actors' names, but I know what you're talking about.
But they talk about the truck in there. He talks about using that. God, what the hell's his name? Kenneth Branagh. That's his damn name. He directed all the Shakespeare movies, and well, they were before you were born. They were the late '80s, early '90s. He played the blonde-haired general in that, who flew in the plane, and he was the one who basically let everybody say whatever they wanted to, and then said, we are doing the camps, and we're doing all this, and we're going to kill all these people. But yeah, they talk about the mobile gas trucks in that. And the thing, what this article doesn't really mention is, the Catholic Church was pretty much complicit in the Holocaust in Germany anyways, and
right.
Anywhere else the Nazis occupied. But B, a lot of these Nazis that the Catholic Church aided after the war were all covertly routed into the U.S. because we used them to fight, well, not to fight, but in the Cold War against the Soviets. Right.
Unfortunately, and I blame this entirely on my high school, although I could probably be complicit in not paying attention. As an adult now, I'm learning a lot more about what my government did and allowed and sort of like ignored to allow for the space race and the fight of the Cold War and things like that. And I remember being in college, probably sophomore year, before I discovered, we allowed Nazi war criminals to come and help us build rockets. And I was like, wow, why didn't I learn about that a decade ago?
Yeah, we're real good about forgetting the ugly parts of our past.
Yes. Here in Tucson, part of the Catalina Mountains are the mountains that we go to that has the ski resort. And part of the Catalina Highway that was built up there and some of the cabins and clearings were done by prisoners in Japanese internment camps. And it is really kind of shocking how many people who have been born and raised here, gone up and down Mount Lemmon their whole life, have no idea and have never paid attention to that. And there are signs that discuss it and, tell the kind of history about it. And unfortunately, it's just this black hole of, lack of information that people just don't know. Oh, what do you mean we imprisoned Japanese people during World War II? Despite the fact that we have all of this history about it here in our city.
Yeah. And Arizona was also home to a POW camp for Germans that we captured during the war.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, the only escape from by German prisoners of war in the U.S. happened at one of the camps there, and the guys made it to Phoenix. And, there was, I don't know how many escaped, but the number kept getting smaller and smaller as they moved along. And by the time they got to Phoenix, there was only a couple of them left. And the one guy that I can remember, who made it to Phoenix, he got busted because he was lost, and he didn't, he knew he was in Phoenix, but he didn't know where he was, and he made the mistake of trying to get information, like directions, out of a cop. And the cop's like, you have a German accent. And I'm sure the German population of Phoenix before the war was 0 or close to it. So they like, we're going to go downtown, and we're going to call the army, and they're going to talk to you before we go any farther on this.
I am constantly amazed by stories like that, because Arizona there is Phoenix and its surrounding suburbs, and there's Tucson, and then there are a couple little small cities. But I purchased some land in the middle of nowhere, Arizona, for stupid cheap. And I'm just kind of amazed that anybody can walk through or survive the deserts of this state. Oh my God.
Yeah. I mean, if you asked me to name a city in Arizona, it'd be Phoenix or Tucson. I couldn't name anywhere else. That's all I know about it.
Phoenix is unfortunately a primate city in our state, where the resources all go to them and everything happens in Phoenix. I'm still kind of amazed that people crossed the U.S. to even get here. And we're like, yeah, let's totally, in the middle of the desert where there's no water and huge sandstorms, yeah, let's build a city. This seems like a great idea.
Yeah, I can remember being a little kid and learning about Utah. I was like 4 or 5, and my mother was talking about Utah and the Mormons and all that stuff. She didn't give me the whole story about the stuff with the Mormons, so I didn't really understand. But I'm like, well, why the hell would you want to live in Utah for the way she describes it? It's like that, whatever that big Mormon miracle is, where they all celebrate that somehow they managed to survive after the grasshoppers came out and ate their crops. I'm like, she told me about that. I forget what it's called, and I'm like, what the hell kind of miracle is that?
It was, I think Mexico was happy to fucking get rid of all this land, because there was nothing up here. Mexico was like, we don't care. We now have Rocky Point and Cancun. You can keep all of Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada. Sure, just keep that. We don't give a shit.
Okay. Go for the next one.
Taxpayers donate $18 million for empty Ark Encounter parking lot. When Kentucky Governor Matt Bevin had his inauguration party, most of the people who attended the party attended the nearly empty venue were evangelicals getting their Jesus on. In a remarkable tip to the half of its supporters, the governor finally approved a tax abatement costing Kentuckians $18 million, along with an $11 million allotment to expand the highway to the Answers in Genesis Ministry of Arizona, who had built a temple to man's stupidity he called the Ark Encounter. So when I first heard of this, I was kind of amazed because Kentucky didn't seem like it had a lot of money to just be giving away.
They don't.
Right. And so here they are needing schools and housing and clean resources like water. And they're giving $18 million for the Ark Encounter, which is perhaps the biggest genocide in the history of the world, should said thing have happened. And I didn't know about the $11 million to expand the highway.
No, I didn't either.
So, holy cow, Kentucky got screwed. And it was recently shown that the parking lots are kind of empty, and even on opening weekend, they weren't meeting their 5,600 needed per day to make up the money that they spent and promised the state. Apparently, the closest town to the Ark Encounter is also not seeing any of the promised benefits of having this amusement park or whatever the hell it's supposed to be. And so they're upset about that because they were promised X million in revenue and they're not seeing it. So I feel horrible that these people kind of got swindled out of all this money. And they're not going to recoup the costs because it's a ministry. So he's getting tax breaks upon tax breaks. And I'm sure he'll be able to file for bankruptcy when this thing goes bust. Like the other religious amusement park that they just sold to Harley. And I just feel so bad. Also, who the hell builds an amusement park to the world's greatest genocide? We don't have Auschwitz-topia. You don't have little SS mice running around doing Heil Hitler as they put your children in striped pajamas. Why would you build an amusement park to the murder of millions and millions of people, which I don't even get, because when that flood recedes, you've just got dead, bloated bodies littering the ground. How is that a thing we want to tell the children? I won't even go into that. But I don't understand how this is like a bedtime story and amusement park. If we killed everybody at Disneyland and flooded the place, that would not be okay. Sorry.
No. Back when I was riding the bus to the job I had in Nashville, one day this lady who she's one of those people who's they's got the diabetes because they genetically fat.
Yeah.
And she was talking about having been to the Ark Encounter shortly after it opened. She's like, "Oh, it's awesome. We're going to go again, but not until they get more stuff out there because there's not really a lot to do right now."
No.
And because apparently all it is the parking lot, the boat, and some zip lines. And that's it. They like his creation museum, if you want to go see that, that's 45 minutes away.
No way. Oh, yeah, I did. Okay. I knew about the Ken Ham Creation Museum.
Yeah, so it's, it's pretty much a clusterfuck, and I forget the details, but the bonds they use to finance it are worse than junk bonds.
That wouldn't surprise me. I mean, he apparently raised $100 million between private citizens and bonds. to get this thing built. And tickets are for a single day. Adults are $40 and like seniors 60 and over. I don't feel like that's a senior. I'm sorry. You guys are not old and seniors when you're fucking 60. Anyway, is $31, but that's just per day. Although they have an annual pass of $175 fucking dollars. So who the hell wants to go annually? You just go to church. This is another tithe. But you've got to have a shit ton of people showing up if you're only $40 a ticket.
Yeah, well, $40 a ticket plus $10, a minimum of $10 for parking.
Oh God!
Yeah, they I saw the breakdown. I forget the details of it, but they do like a lot of places do. If you're in a car, you're charged one amount. If you're in a van, you're charged another amount. If you're in an SUV, it's a third. If you're in an RV, it's another amount. If you're in a bus, it's another amount. And it's and there's also costs associated with the number of people in the vehicle as well, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, you're getting, it's, you're paying a shit ton of money, and, you go see a boat and maybe do a zip line, and that's it. I mean, Disney World is insanely expensive, but there's more shit there than you can possibly do in a day.
Right, and I've convinced, and I don't know how, my friends to go with me to New Mexico to a dark sky observatory dark sky sanctuary to go camping, and that's free. So if you want to see God's majesty, why don't you just go sit out under the fucking stars and kneel and pray for what is going to amount to a tank of gas, which is $20. I cannot imagine, and I'm thankful that other podcasters have gone and shared the madness so I don't have to. But I can't imagine spending $40 to go to the Ark Encounter in middle of nowhere, Kentucky.
Yeah, I mean it's not even close to like Louisville, where there are fun activities to do. But like there's some nightlife. I mean, okay, let's face it. The kind of people who go to the Ark Encounter aren't going to be the kind of people that go to a club and dance all night. But there's decent restaurants in Louisville. There's cultural exhibits there, and hell, there's a well, no, they closed down the bat plant, but I mean, there's stuff related to athletics because I mean, Muhammad Ali was from there, and they did for like a century make famous baseball bats there, so there's stuff related to that. So there's other stuff you could do, but it's crazy.
And I'm not the best person financially, but I tend to get upset when people spend money on things that I think are bullshit. Although, having said that, I just randomly bought a kayak. So in every other sense, I'm really good about spending my money. And I would be super pissed off if I discovered that my husband had said, honey, we're going to pack the 4 fucking kids into the SUV and drive from middle of nowhere, Alabama to middle of nowhere, Kentucky, and spend $40 an adult and $28 a child to go see bullshit animatronics in a cage.
Yeah.
I'd be so mad.
Yeah. I mean, you could sort of understand it if they had a bunch of activities there, but it's just a boat and a zip line.
Right. Like Hayden Planetarium in New York City or the American History Museum. I lucked out because I got to take a military person with me, so always take a military person with you because they get amazing fucking discounts. Just grab one off the street. They're amazing. They're probably not doing anything anyway. Especially the homeless. Sorry, that was a fucked up comment. But I was willing to spend the money to go to the American Museum of Natural History. Like, that is worth it. I cannot believe people spent, and it was half the price of the Creation Museum, and I'm sure the Ark Encounter.
Yeah.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
Asps. Very dangerous. You go first.
This is from JewishPress.com. Archaeological evidence of the Kingdom of David, which is a clickbait headline because, as they later on admit, well, no, we don't have any evidence for David at all, but this is a city that happens to be in the area that they talked about in the Bible that King David lived in, and it dates from about the right time period for the beginning of civilization in Israel, so we're just going to call it the Kingdom of David. Let's hear it. The place was described by the Bible as the location of the battle between David and Goliath. The highlights of the findings of the Elah Valley excavations are now to be presented to the public for the first time at an exhibition scheduled to open at the Bible Lands Museum in Jerusalem on September 5th. Archaeology cannot find a man, and we did not find the remnants linked to King David himself, Professor Garfinkel. God, where's Simon? Told Taz Pitt Press Service. But what we did find is archaeological evidence of the social process of urbanization in Judea. So in other words, they found the beginnings of civilization there, and they decided to say it was King David. Which is...
that drives me nuts. Because watch it be one of the few instances where it was a woman in charge, and now it's fucking King David. Sorry.
Well, they found somewhere in the hills in Israel, in an area that was not, it wasn't a city, but it was obviously an area where people made a religious pilgrimage to this area. They found, dating back like 20,000 years, I mean, a shitload of time in the past, they found all these things which were dildos.
Sounds like my kind of kingdom.
I mean, they had dildos, and they had these rock you call them sculptures. They were basically piles of rocks that were shaped like a vagina.
Oh, I love them already.
And it all, it predates Judaism by thousands of years, and they're going, we really don't kind of know what to make of this because we didn't even think there were people living here. But not only were they living here, they had a pretty advanced civilization because they clearly didn't live here. They just traveled to here to hold religious ceremonies. Now they weren't so stupid as to try and claim that this thing wasn't a giant dildo or a vagina or whatever. They admitted what they were, but they're like, we just don't understand how this happened and how it got here and how it could be so old.
I love when things like that happen and we're like, wow, our ancestors were far more advanced and way hornier than we ever assumed.
Well, and I can't find the article now because I'm not going to go digging for it because it's from the pre-internet days. But in Omni magazine back in the 80s, they published an article about they had found this weird strip of leather, and they could not figure out what it was for. It had obviously been stitched together, and
right.
They fished it out of a peat bog in England. And so they're limited to what they could do with it because it's so old and fragile. And eventually somebody figured out that, it's a condom. And it was from the Stone Age. And they're like, we had no idea they had figured this out back then.
I love that. going back to the American Museum of Natural History. So in the basement, they had an exhibit about evolution and early man and our ancestors and things like that. And I was so incredibly pissed off that I actually heard someone say, well, this probably isn't true, so take it all with a grain of salt. And walk past this display into a display of geology and rocks and other things. And I just thought, we have this whole building that is taking up a city fucking block that has been here for almost 200 years. And you're going to say that this probably isn't true, take it with a grain of salt. And I'm like, science is amazing. Why can't you just believe us? Why can't you believe in archaeology and biology and just believe these things? And it drives me crazy because I'm like, look at the things that we have done. Drives me nuts.
Oh, well, there was a message board I'm on. There's a guy who recently nearly lost his foot because of drug-resistant bacteria. And he, after that happened, there was a discussion about something, and he's like, well, I really don't believe in evolution. It's like, that's kind of ironic coming from a guy who nearly had his foot eaten off by drug-resistant bacteria, which wouldn't exist were it not for evolution.
And I really don't think people get that, although it's odd because I know people who believe evolution on a small scale of bacteria and viruses and things like that, but will not believe it as in human, fish, dogs, cats, things like that. And I just can't believe that he couldn't. How does he not get that? I don't understand how he could not believe and almost lost his foot to the thing that he doesn't believe.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at my eldest brother, he looks like a chimp.
Oh, God! Tucker, that's not nice!
Well, he looks, he looks at all. Well, he's grown a beard, so he looks more like the Gordon's fisherman now than, or an Amish guy. But, when he was clean shaven, he had a very Homer Simpson chimp-like appearance. And, one of my ex-sister-in-laws, her brothers, who I grew up with as a kid, I saw them a couple of years ago, and one of them, it's like, you want a banana? I mean, he is chimp-like. And it's like, how can you look at somebody like that and say, no, we didn't come from no monkeys? It's like, you absolutely, we did.
There is a male model that was sort of famous because they said he kind of looked a little like Neanderthal, so he had the very heavy brow ridge and real rigid square face. And I mean, calling someone a Neanderthal is not exactly a compliment, but there really is something about his face, and you're like, wow, I see the way in which human features have evolved. And things like the people that have the werewolf disease where they're covered in fur, you think about, all right, that makes a lot of sense. If we're just these naked little monkey kind of things, we probably needed fur to survive, because you're not going to live in Alaska without some sort of coating and protection.
Yeah, there was an evolutionary biologist who makes the argument that the reason our brains were able to grow so big was because we did lose our fur, and we didn't have to spend so much time or so much of our energy growing hair at the levels that chimpanzees and other animals do. And,
right.
I mean, there's a whole lot of little factors that they think may have shifted us to have greater intelligence than animals. Well, other animals, I should say, since we are animals. But, you know, it's like, I can remember I was watching some show when they were talking about the, they were showing people in France, and at that point, I realized how you could look at somebody and know what country they were from, because all these people had similar characteristics that they were showing, and it wasn't, you know, overt. And I've learned to recognize, you know, well, okay, if you're from Japan, you're probably going to have this kind of face. If you're Chinese, you're probably going to have that kind of face. You know, there's height differences that you'll see in different Asian countries. And there's all these little subtle changes that, you know, obviously when you give enough time, they're going to create fairly distinctive characteristics that are even greater than just, say, eye color or hair color or something like that.
I feel the same way. The first time that I saw someone that was sort of native Australian, so one of the Aboriginal tribes, they are native to the region, but differ physically from... It bothered me when someone was like, oh, they're black people. And I'm like, no, they look different. And even within the continent of Africa, native tribes look different. Like, you can't... I get that people are like, well, they're African. Right. Okay, I get that. But the Egyptians look very different for me from, like, native Kenyans.
Yeah. That we have a lot of Sudanese here, and I've noticed that there's, you know, they have certain characteristics that I've, you know, not that I've never been to Africa, but I've seen, you know, different photos of people from Africa, and the Sudanese look very different than somebody who is from Kenya or Nigeria or wherever. And
there was a really great. I won't say really great, because I hated her for doing it, but there was like a Dutch photographer who morphed herself through Photoshop into different women of African regions. And so I hated her for doing that instead of like just taking photos of the different women from African regions. But in looking at the photo series, you were like, oh, despite the fact that, you know, American black people called themselves African American, there was a physical difference between regions of the continent and countries, and regions within the countries. So it was a very interesting and problematic photo shoot, but I learned a bit. So,
well, one thing I found that I didn't know is a lot of people in Africa, the palms of their hands are black. And when I say black, I mean they're the same color as the back of their hand. Whereas I'm sure your palms are a lighter color.
Yes, as are the soles of my feet.
And that's apparently a regional thing.
I didn't know that. That is actually... I'm going to go harass some friends of mine now. It's going to be a very awkward conversation. Hey, take off your shoes. I want to see the soles of your feet.
Yeah. Have you... It's a mildly racist term, so forgive me for using it. But no, have you ever heard of the term blue gum?
No.
Okay, that's somebody that's a derogatory. My understanding. Let me make that clear. My understanding is that is a derogatory term used by lighter skinned blacks against darker skinned blacks who have their gums are a really dark color.
Right.
And in some cases they're bluish. And it has to do, I'm guessing it has to do with the fact that there's less, that the people who are referred to as blue gums are more, they have a purer strain of African, and they're more African than, say, somebody like you who I'm assuming you're a descendant of slaves, so there's some mixing with the slave master in your ancestry if your later ancestors didn't marry somebody who was white at some point or Native American. But that's it's apparently it's not commonly used anymore, if it ever was. But I've heard the term discussed a few times.
That is. So, I am actually second generation American. My grandmother is from the Ivory Coast.
Oh, okay.
And then my mother is her father was an African American man from the States, and my grandmother's from West Africa. And then my father is from Jamaica. So I am
a Heinz 57.
Yes. Between like my mother and my grandmother, because my grandmother's parents are apparently a woman from the Ivory Coast, and then her father is a Dutch South African. So my grandmother was very pale and had like blue eyes and had red hair for a little while, and then that darkened, and so she was like a light brunette. But I'm trying to like think of my father's smile, because he's that like real gorgeous, dark, deep black tone that I love. Like I don't know, like when he's in the sun, like his skin seems to just sort of shine and glow, and I fucking love it. Yeah, I'm trying to think of his face now. I'll have to like Google a picture of, or not, like look him up on Facebook and start staring at his picture.
Yeah.
Dad, send me photos of your gums.
It's like I said, it's I've heard it used a few times. I can't remember. I know I've read it somewhere, somebody talking about it, but I can't remember where it was. But that's it. It's one of those things that I guess people don't talk about a lot because, you know, there's ugly connotations with it, even when you're trying to discuss it in a clinical fashion. Right.
Interesting, because I it's a treat. I know that. So that's kind of, I'm always interested to learn these like terms, whether derogatory or not, that are regional, because I've never heard that before. So now I'm going to Google it and like ask other people. Thank you, Tucker.
Yeah, well, you know, it's one of the things, it's a dangerous assumption that we all make that you know, if you're African American, your family, you know, you're descended from slaves, because it's like, remember when they came out with the DNA analysis or the genealogical analysis of Obama, and they found out he was Dick Cheney's cousin.
Right.
And my first thought was, oh, well, yeah, okay, you know, I'm sure Dick Cheney's ancestors were slave owners, and that's how it got it. Not remembering that, no, Obama's father's from Kenya, so it would have had to been from his mother's side of the family.
Right.
You know, but then again, it's like I had a friend who she saw the picture of Nichelle Nicole with Obama doing the Vulcan salute.
Yeah.
And she thought it was Obama's mother.
Oh.
I was like, no, that's Nichelle Nicole, the original Lieutenant Uhura, not Obama's mother. She was white. Which, I mean, that must have been a really interesting marriage. I know it didn't last very long, but considering it was the early 60s that they got married.
Yeah.
And he was from, you know, he wasn't, you know, he wasn't an American. He was somebody from Kenya, so that must have. And her first name was Stanley.
My grandmother's last husband was a white German immigrant who came right after the war. So not related to myself, my mother, or my uncle. And it just, it's kind of cool that this white man was willing to be in a relationship with a black woman that he couldn't marry for 3 or 4 years after they were together because it wasn't legal. So I just always think that's kind of cool.
There's
people were like, fuck you.
There's an elderly couple I see in town that's interracial, and it's like, wow, that must be a marriage, because, they're old enough that they had to spend decades together before it was legal for them to get married, let alone for it to become acceptable for them to be married to one another. Right.
So it's people who, of my mother's age who are interracial, and biracial, and I think, wow, that's really kind of amazing. The Loving story, which has been made into a couple documentaries and like a Lifetime series, they're doing another biopic about them. And one of the first serious dates I ever went on was watching a photography series at the New York Museum of Photography with an Asian male whose parents his mom was from Korea and his dad's a white American male. And it was his first time realizing that 30 years prior, his parents couldn't have been in a relationship. And so it was just really interesting to be there with him and like say, yeah, this is something that my grandparents went through and your parents couldn't have done a generation before. You wouldn't have existed without difficulties.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, enough. Let's go ahead and hit the next story.
So the next story is reconstructing the 6th century plague from a victim. Before the infamous Black Death, the first Great Plague epidemic was the Justinian Plague, which over the course of 2 centuries wiped out an estimated 15 million
50
people. I'm sorry, 50 million, which was 15% of the world's population throughout the Byzantine Empire, and may have helped speed the decline of the Eastern Roman Empire. And nobody knows why it disappeared. But researchers in Germany have now confirmed this by recovering the bacterial culprit from 6th century skeletons found in an ancient southern German burial site near Munich. The genome of this Alterding genome dates back to the beginning of the plague. They have generated the first high-coverage genome of the bacterial agent responsible for the Justinian plague, in addition to revealing the insights of the molecular evolution of pests since the Byzantine Empire. This was super kind of cool. It's kind of amazing that we are able to, through gene sequencing and skeletons that have been dead for thousands of years, we're like, oh wow, look at this thing. We can like sequence its DNA and tell you it's related to the Black Death or thought to be related to the Black Death. And this happened 5,000 years ago, and we kind of now know what it is and how it happened.
Well, and it's also remarkable because we're still at risk of it today, because apparently the differences between the Black Death and the Justinian plague that wiped out millions of people, or hundreds of millions of people, probably, when you figure in all the death tolls over the centuries, and what strains we have today are very minor, and if something was to get flipped in that DNA, it could instantly turn back into something that is horrendously devastating.
Right.
This is, I can remember, when AIDS first started gaining national attention and people were calling it the new Black Plague because it was killing people and we had no way of treating it. And as part, my new job, I make the shields that they put in front of doctors' eyes when they're doing surgery so they don't have to worry about blood getting shot in their eyes. Well, that was all developed because of the stigma associated with AIDS.
Right.
There was, blood didn't suddenly start spurting into surgeons' eyes when AIDS came around. It had always been there, and it was accepted as a risk of the job. But because of the stigma of having AIDS, they're like, no, we've got to do something about this.
Which is amazing, because they also know about hand washing at this point. Like, we get that we should wash our hands before we do the next surgery. But no, it's fine. Let's totally let someone's blood squirt into my face. That's not an issue.
Well, oh God, what's his? Ignaz Semmelweis. Have you ever heard of him?
No.
He was a 19th century OBGYN. That's not what they would have called him back then, but that's basically what he did. He's the guy who figured out hand washing.
Oh, okay.
And nobody believed him. They said, you're crazy that hand washing would save lives. They decided he was crazy and locked him up in a mental institution.
Which blows me away, because it's not like we had gloves, disposable gloves that you could change. Why wouldn't you want to get the dirt and grime and gross stuff? I mean, we at this point knew that if you rubbed small children in cow pustules, you would get, if you continued to do it, like cowpox. And the cow maidens didn't get it because they'd sort of self-inoculated. Like, how would you not then get, oh, maybe I should wash my hands before I put my hand in a woman's vagina?
Yeah, and I mean, that was considered a symbol of pride to go around with a bloody outfit if you were a surgeon. And Semmelweis was later. They locked him up in the mental institution, and he was beaten to death by the staff. And my guess is that he was apparently he had gotten really, aggressive about ensuring things like hand washing. And my guess is that he probably set them off because he was like, no, you can't do whatever it is you're doing with dirty hands. You have to clean your hands. And they said, you're crazy, and beat him to death.
Can you imagine going back in time, even a century, to 1916, with the knowledge that we have of the world today, let alone like during the Black Plague in the 12th century, and say, here's how maybe we could stop this. We're going to boil some water and we're going to fucking wash our hands. I can't believe that's something we take for granted, because I, who work in a hospital, judge the shit out of people who don't wash their hands. Oh my God, there is a surgeon that walks into a room, touches stuff, and leaves without gloves on, and touches everything in his path. And I just think, sir, why and how? You know what's going to happen. We gave you a medical degree. And it just, something we think of as so simple was revolutionary and crazy a couple centuries ago.
Yeah, well, we have, where I work, I mean, we don't sterilize the stuff. After we make it, we send it out to be sterilized. Thank you, Fuzznuts. But, we have all kinds of restrictions on what we can wear. I mean, we have to wear a special coat and a hair net.
Right.
But we have, you're not allowed to wear jewelry with stones in it because they're worried about it falling into something. You can't wear earrings with stones in them because they're worried about them falling into stuff. And there's all kinds of limitations on what you can and cannot do. And, and then we send the stuff out, and when they sterilize it, they hit it with gamma radiation, which is, pretty intense stuff. to sterilize something.
We're hoping to make a Hulk Spider-Man crossover.
Yeah, on my first day there, they were talking about, the guy kept talking about sterilizing, stuff with gamma radiation, and he was saying something like, and the deal with gamma radiation, and I so wanted to say, if you get too much of it, you turn into the Hulk, but I figured that probably wouldn't be very good on my first day.
If I was your employer, I would love you and immediately give you a raise, because even though I don't watch or care about the Hulk, just the fact that you made a nerdy comic book reference endears you to my heart. So,
yeah, well, this is the South where you have to be careful what you say, because you don't know when you're going to cross the line with Jesus stuff.
Oh, yeah. I feel like Jesus was totally a gamma radiation superhero. I mean, who else walks on water and turns water into wine? I mean,
yeah. Well, who can turn water into wine and stay sober?
I would probably be an alcoholic.
Perhaps I shouldn't campaign at all. I'll just, I'll write it right into the White House.
Oh. And we are now in political news, my favorite kind of news. That's not true. But this is one of my favorite news stories ever. Oh, okay. Latinos for Trump founder warns that if Trump loses, America will have taco trucks on every corner. And this is not the first time he has warned of this. He warned about it earlier. And he discussed taco trucks and paella and these fruit things that they do that have chile and limon and all these amazing things and margaritas. And how dare what did he say? That the culture, there's a very dominant Hispanic culture and it will take over, which is how they will get the taco trucks on every corner.
Yeah.
And I just am blown away that A, this is a bad thing, and B, he said something so incredibly this internalized racism that I just can't get behind.
At my old job, down a couple of blocks down, right by the bus stop, was a taco truck, and there are no taco trucks in the town I live in, and I ate there a few times because I knew I was well, it's going to be over an hour before I get home, and I'm starved, and it was really good. And that was one of the things I did at my last week at work, was I made sure that I didn't get a taco from them. I got one of their burritos because it's 2 pounds and it's only $5, and it's fucking awesome. Because I was I don't know when I'll ever get another burrito this good again, so damn it, I'm getting one now. And it's just why would you say that having taco trucks on every corner was a bad thing? I mean...
it's got to be somehow the culture, the people are bad. They're taking away... what is American cuisine. And so I spent
excuse me, but they, they're all descended from people who were here long before the Europeans ever showed up.
Right. So I spent the majority of my adult life in Texas, and I'm used to Tex-Mex, which is nothing like actual Mexican food, but Mexican music and Mexican culture and the Spanish language, even though it has evolved to be a sort of Texan pidgin, to hear Spanish is comforting to me. To hear mariachi bands is comforting to me. This is what home was. And then I moved to Connecticut for 6 months, and there is not a Mexican to be found anywhere. It was the first time that I discovered empanadas in other countries are not the same as in Mexico. So empanadas, the ones I was used to, are filled with pineapple and apple and things like that. They're very sweet things. Well, if you meet the Cubans in Connecticut, they're filled with meat and potatoes, and they're savory, and they're a meal. And so while that was amazing to me, I needed home. I need the Spanish that I was used to, because the Cubans are not speaking a Spanish that I understand. And I need tacos, and I need burritos, and I need like a mariachi band, and I need cumbia, and I need to see a fucking Mexican flag. And you didn't find that in Connecticut. And then I moved to Arizona, and again, I felt like I was home, because this culture and this group of people that I'd been raised around are here again. And this man is saying taco trucks on every corner like it's a bad thing. And I'm like, no. Mexicans are great people. You need to have more of them. Can we just like merge the two countries? I will happily be Mexican. I got this. And just as if it's a bad thing to also like to discuss the taco trucks on every corner. Like, that's a bad thing. Like, it's a bad thing for someone to come to a country where they may not speak the language, where they may not have financial and emotional resources to create a job for themselves through this taco truck and be able to take care of their family. They have made their own schedule, because the taco trucks in my city post on Facebook, and they may only do, maybe nights and weekends, and they're at the same spot all the time. And through that, they're also, maybe they provide fresh produce in the summer. So you could get a taco or a burrito, and you get a fucking watermelon for stupid cheap. So they've created a job for themselves. They're bringing produce to a region that may not have produce, and then creating jobs for others, because somebody's got to fucking help fix the taco truck. And obviously we now need more health inspectors, because all of these things are inspected. Like, it's as if an immigrant coming to a country where they had nothing and creating a job for themselves and others is a bad thing. But it's the fucking American dream. Like, that is what everyone wants. This is what who's the asshole for the libertarians? Gary Johnson. That's what he talks about all the time. These people should be in love with Mexicans that create taco truck jobs on every corner.
Well, and in places like Los Angeles, from what I understand, they have fusion cuisine taco trucks. Like, there's a guy who I don't know his ethnic background, but it's somehow mixed, and he does a Korean taco truck. He makes tacos that are, Mexican or, Latin American flavors mixed with Korean flavors, and apparently they're insanely good. I mean, he's like, he's considered a gourmet chef because of what he's done with that, and he's like raking in big bucks because of that.
That's right, and like, that's what this country was founded on. This woman was upset at me a couple weeks ago because we were talking about the football player that didn't rise for the national anthem, and I realized that I don't, despite my name, have a lot of patriotism and real nationalism. Like, I love my country, I enjoy living here, but assuming that I get to talk shit and have sex with people and there's sort of like the same standard of living, I'm not tied to this country. If you said I had to move to Canada tomorrow but kept my same standard of living, fucking that's fine, I'm a Canadian tomorrow. Like, I may change my name just to like fit with where I am now, but I want to live in Mexico City and Paris. Like, those are the cities that if I could move tomorrow, those are the cities that I would live in. And she was just sort of upset that I didn't have this ingrained pride in both the song of my country and the flag. And I was like, that's not what makes America great for me. What makes America great for me and what gives me a sense of pride is Mexican fusion taco trucks in Las Vegas. There is a Korean art display in the Tucson Convention Center, that gives me a sense of pride in my country. Like, these are the things that I love. And how dare you look at taco trucks on every corner as a bad thing and not sort of the symbol of what makes this country supposedly great and makes everyone want to fucking live here.
Yeah.
I'm so mad at this man, and I would smack him if I got a hold of him.
Yeah, it's crazy. What's the football player's name is what? Copernicus or something like that? It's
Kaepernick, something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Something.
And you know, people are all butthurt about him not standing for the national anthem, and it's like, well, no, that's part of what is supposed to be about America, is that you can protest anything. And if you blindly just say, well, America's great no matter what, you can't address the problems that exist. You know, I mean, you know, we should be able to recognize that, okay, no matter how good a country is, it is always going to have things that can be improved upon. And if you just say, oh, no, we're the best on the planet, you're not focusing on the things that could be improved to make it even better.
Right, and fucking North Korea has blind mandatory patriotism. We believe we are better than that because we continue to look at, you know, the amendments to our Constitution. And so if you hold the First Amendment to heart and yet get angry when people exercise it, well, then what the fuck makes this country so great? You cannot have both.
Yeah.
And it's really been a great discussion for me because I didn't realize that perhaps I wasn't as patriotic as I assumed, or I'm sure a lot of people assumed, because I have the name that I have. And I kind of realized that it's more because of my ego and my love of attention. If I could be named Jennifer or Samantha or Quavasione and get the same amount of fucking attention, I'd change my name. So I think this has been a really great discussion, and I'm kind of glad this jerk, Marco Gutierrez, said what he said, because while everyone thinks it's funny, it brings up another discussion and sort of a unifying moment, because who the fuck doesn't love tacos?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, you know, why would anybody object to taco trucks or any food truck on every corner? You know, I mean, that's you know, a symbol of how great this country is, that we have so much food that there's, you know, you can eat food, you know, you can get food anywhere, literally.
Right, and I think he's sort of trying to speak to the people that are like, America, we need like American food. Because I met a guy and I tried to ask him out on a date, and I was like, hey, maybe let's try this thing or let's try this thing. And he said, no, I only eat American food. And I was so lost as to what he meant. And I asked for, you know, examples. And he said things like pizza, spaghetti, lasagna, meatloaf, and tacos. And I was like, okay, 4 of those 5 things, or I'm sorry, he may have also mentioned hamburgers, but the majority of the things that he mentioned were not American in origin. But he'd been so ingrained to just think of pizza as this American food that he didn't think about, well, maybe it's Italian in origin, along with fucking spaghetti. And tacos did not come from Taco Bell. We have a whole southern region of a continent that was bringing us tacos. And it just, I was kind of amazed that we both love the things that make us different and hate them unless they're completely and totally assimilated.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I've known in a lot of people who have their diet is limited to what's known as meat and 3, which is southern, at least in this part of the South, you go to a restaurant and you get like, some kind of pork or some kind of beef or some kind of chicken, and then, 3 vegetables or, 3 sides of some kind, 2 of which will be a vegetable and 1 of which will be like macaroni and cheese. And that's literally all they'll eat, But they're actually fairly rare. Although I did have a teacher in high school who ate something like, she married a guy, and after she married him, she discovered all he would eat was stuff like meat and potatoes.
Right, which I just think, I assume is a joke back to like, our parents and grandparents, where that was just kind of, you had like you had like meatloaf or a pot roast or something, and you had some mashed potatoes and maybe a spinach or a thing. But we've gone past that. My grandmother, who is a black woman, an African woman, makes fucking amazing enchiladas. And did a fusion with them. And we would do like fish enchiladas because she loved seafood and that was just her thing. And I just think how amazing to involve your own home cuisines. And she would do like sort of a Jamaican rice, like peas and rice on the side. And that's not traditional to any one culture. This is this fusion of a couple places, and that's what we should be. Taco trucks on every corner should be amazing to anybody who hears that.
Yeah.
But they were obviously talking to racist assholes who were like, God damn those Mexicans. Despite the fact that everything west of the Mississippi from, the border of Mexico to Canada was fucking Mexico anyway 4 generations ago. We're not that far removed.
Yeah. Okay, and we'll hit the last story now. Mike Pence lamented AIDS activists speaking at GOP convention, published anti-gay articles in Indiana Journal. 20 years ago, Mike Pence was wishing for a Republican convention that was a bit more, for lack of a better term, Trumpian. Writing in the Indiana Policy Review, a magazine published by a statewide think tank of the same name that he once ran, convenient. Pence lamented that the 1996 Republican National Convention had become an endless line of pro-choice women, AIDS activists, and proponents of affirmative action. Now, the 1996 convention, I believe, that wasn't the one where fucking Pat Robertson spoke at, or who's that other asshole?
There are a lot of them.
Yeah. No, but there was one Pat Robertson at one of the Republican conventions said that, liberals want women to, turn to witchcraft, have abortions, things like that. And another one, the guy, he said all kinds of crazy shit, and the joke about it was, well, it sounded better in the original German. Pat Buchanan, that's the other one. But, let's face it, the GOP, without even looking at this, I know for a fact that the GOP didn't have AIDS activists speaking at the 96 convention, in the sense that they were actual people saying the Republican Party is the only one that's going to help people with AIDS. They,
right.
That had to be a minor part of what that individual was known for. And, of course, pro-choice. No, come on, 96, that was Clinton versus Bob Dole, and somebody said that if Clinton, either in 92 or 96, somebody said that if Clinton won, there would be abortion clinics on every corner. So I can't see, I just can't see that. This has all got to be figments of his imagination. And, this guy is Trump's vice presidential pick, which is fucking scary.
There was someone, and I heard it from a podcast, that said that Trump seems to be self-sabotaging his own campaign. And this was kind of, I think they made a quote from like Michael Moore. That, this was supposed to revive a reality show or,
right.
sell a book deal that he's going to do later. And I really start to wonder when I hear the crazy that comes out of both his and Pence's mouth. I mean, did you hear that Pence went to, I don't know if it was Harlem or like Philadelphia or something. He went to a black barber shop, got a haircut, and at the end the barber's like, "And who the hell were you?"
Yeah.
And the news was like, "Wow, this is amazing." And he said, "Oh, I'm the guy running for VP under Donald Trump." And the barber was like, "Oh, okay." And I'm wondering, because it's crazy.
Yeah. While I can believe that Trump was, started his presidential thing to get more money out of NBC for his reality show, I don't believe he's self-sabotaging, because I have a boss I used to work for had business dealings with Trump at one point in time, and everything he said about Trump has been consistent with Trump's current behavior. And if you, I don't know if you listen to Penn Jillette's podcast, Penn Sunday School.
No.
He, on several episodes, he's talked about being on The Apprentice, and everything he's described about Trump, and this is like over the years that I've listened to the podcast, whenever the subject has come up, everything he said about Trump matches what we're seeing with Trump's behavior now. He said that, the boardroom scenes that, at the end of each episode that lasted 5 minutes or whatever, however long, he said that was the product of them just sitting there in the boardroom for 12 hours while Trump rambled on. And then they would have to edit that into something coherent later.
Wow.
Yeah, and I've known people who have the same kind of personality issues that Trump is thought to have, and their their behavior it matches Trump's, and it's not the self-sabotage is not in their vocabulary. They could do it, but it wouldn't be a conscious decision on their part.
Right.
So. But, I mean, if he gets into the White House, we're screwed.
Everybody loves The Walking Dead and that 3-part movie series where the white girl went and had to, fight for her life in the ring in the big city. Everybody loves these things. So I feel like we have all been prepped for this. I mean, who doesn't want the road to happen, where you have to maybe fight your way away from people who are eating each other in a basement, and then you die and your 7-year-old is left to wander the roads alone. I think we'll be fine, Tucker. We'll be fine. Don't even worry about it. I've read all the books. I mean, think about all the people that are prepping right now. We are prepping in the event of a totalitarian government that is going to come and take our guns and kill everybody. And now we're getting it. We wanted this to happen. It'll be fine. Just make sure you have your guns and food. It'll be great.
Yeah, it's great.
You may have to eat the cat. I don't know how you feel about that, but just you may need to make some jerky for the travels.
Yeah, it's all fun and games when you're Mad Max, but when you're the guys Mad Max is killing, that's not quite so much fun.
Right, when you're the dude that's attached to the truck as they're driving through the desert, that's not fun. You don't want to be the blood bag.
Yeah. Which is where most people would end up, statistically speaking.
Right. I'm sure if slavery comes back, Tucker, it's going to be fine. We saw how it went the first time. We know that according to, was it Rush Limbaugh or whoever does the crazy podcast, that slaves lived in rather nice homes and were sometimes paid. Don't even worry about it, Tucker.
It was Bill O'Reilly.
Okay.
Not that he's any less crazy than Rush. But.
Right. And see, now that I'm having my tubes tied, I can be a bed warmer and don't have to worry about giving birth to a whole bunch of children later. It'll be fine.
Yeah, right.
See, one of us has to be optimistic about the end of the world. I love living in hot climates. I'll just wear a tank top. Hell, we'll probably have our clothes burned off of us in the nuclear blast. We'll just run around naked. Then we won't have to worry about, like, body shaming. This is going to be great for all of us. It's going to be amazing. Oh, my God. Maybe we'll all grow tails again. You know what? I think I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. I have a bow and arrow sitting right next to me. I'm going to go start hunting squirrels. And as atheists, we're supposed to eat babies anyway. Now we'll get to do it for real. Tucker, I'm so excited. I'm voting for Donald Trump. Not only do I get taco trucks on every corner, then I get to eat literal babies. It's going to be amazing, Tucker.
You know, the show title for this episode is going to be Baby Serving Taco Trucks. Or Taco Trucks Serve Babies.
Oh, I am so excited. All hail President Trump. I'm so excited. I just, Tucker, but the thing is, when it happens, I'm going to have to fly to your home so that when I do have to become a sex slave, I can at least be in the home of someone that I think would respect me at least a little bit. So are you okay with having sex continuously with a 29-year-old black woman?
I think I could manage that.
Okay. I just want to make sure, Tucker. I don't want to make you uncomfortable in any way. It'll be fine. I like this. All right. Come on, November. I'm excited.
The views and opinions expressed by America do not necessarily represent.
Oh, God. Oh. Oh, I'm so excited for President Trump.
Okay. Well, I think we'll wrap that up here. So, I appreciate you being on, and we'll have you on again real soon. So.
Awesome.
And I just want to say that there was a lot more America and I talked about, which you'll have to be a Patreon subscriber to hear the rest of it, because we're pushing the 2-hour mark and I still haven't gotten everything posted. So if you want to hear the rest of it, become a Patreon subscriber and you'll get it. It was pretty good.
That's it for this episode of The Atheist in the Trailer Park Podcast. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, as well as just about anywhere else podcasts can be found. Many of the episodes are also on YouTube. Follow the show on Twitter. @TParkAtheist is the show's Twitter handle. It's on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist.com. If you happen to like the podcast, please rate it on iTunes. If you'd like to support the podcast, there's a donate button on the show notes page. You can support it via Patreon at patreon.com/TNTucker. Thanks for listening.
Say goodnight, Fuzz-Nuts.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.
Damned cat.